Hey everybody, Jay Graydon, your 17,453rd new best friend. Yep, I've got my own laugh tracks. So anyway, I'm having the distinct pleasure of speaking with an old friend of mine who's like a brother. And it's time to introduce Marcus Ryle.
Hey, how you doing, Rake?
I'm doing good, Marcus, now that I'm talking to you. I met Marcus in somewhere around 1978. Does that sound right?
It'd be early 80s, because it was after I started at Oberheim in 80. We probably met in 81 or 82, early session times for me. So right. 40 plus years ago.
Almost a half a century, if you round it off. Marcus is the best synth programmer ever, but that's only where it starts. But I met Marcus to hire him as a programmer, and here's why. Back in the day when I was making records and I had my 2600, all the knobs and adjustments are all on the panel. And then when it switched over from regular analog to readout displays, where all these pages of information for settings is buried, I didn't have time to learn how to use these synths. As well as the DX7. When that came out, that was like an incredibly difficult instrument to get sounds tweaked. And Marcus, of course, being the genius he is, was outstanding. And I'm not kidding. Marcus, I got to tell you, the sounds you came up with were just incredible.
Oh, thank you. Well, see, I was able to cheat, because the thing is, for most people, the DX7 was the first time they experienced FM, and it came out in 1983. But in 1979, early 79, I was able to acquire a synclavier, the very first generation of synclavier, of which there were maybe only a dozen made, for Cal State Dominguez Hills. And that was actually one of the earliest FM synthesizers. And I was able to program that synth and actually had the source code for the synclavier and a little Sorach terminal, so you could play with actually making your own algorithms and things like that. So I had a pretty early introduction to FM. So when the DX7 came out, it was like just old home week for me. It was pretty easy to get around. So,
speaking of school, when Marcus was in college, he ended up teaching most of the classes he was in. The teacher said, "You know more than I do, man, so take over." And I'm not kidding. This is real.
I think it was just, I don't see it quite as glamorously, but I think they were mainly just understaffed. but I was really lucky. I was teaching recording engineering and analog and digital synthesis and stuff like that. We had a nice little studio, and it was just a great place to hang out. I was just happy to be playing with all the gear. So
after Marcus and I worked together on so many projects I produced, we remain friends, and to this day, he's like one of my besties, and I'm not kidding.
Likewise.
So,
thanks.
Thanks, brother. Brother man. So, now, I humbly say that I'm kind of a nerd, not on the level Marcus. Yeah, right. Okay, well, you know how picky I am. That's another story. So, Marcus is not only a great keyboard player, he's more suited for design and like anything electronic. So what was the first project we worked on together?
First one we worked on together? Well, I mean, when we met, I was still at Oberheim. And so that was designing all of these guys over here. The DSX over there was my first project. The OB-Xa I worked on, and then the DSX DMX OB-8 Matrix-12 Xpander. So I would bring my gear over for sessions, but then I think we started kind of getting overlapping into the design stuff, probably starting with the Xpander, because you've got two Xpanders and you were real into the everything that could do. But then in 1980, 85 is when I left Oberheim, and my wife Susan and another engineer from Oberheim, Michelle Dwadik, and I started a company called Fast Forward Designs. And our first client was Dynacord. We did the Ad1 drum brain. But then shortly thereafter, we started working for Alesis, and we designed like 40 products for Alesis. So the HR-16B might be the first we got kind of deep together on, because the samples were recorded at your studio, as I recall. They were. And that's, I've got one, it's over there, it's out of camera. That drum machine, that was my first experience in learning that Jay really does have golden ears. It wasn't just hype, because if you recall, so we did spent all this time working on the recordings in your studio and A-Bing them, make sure everything's cool, had it all done. Then we go and have to burn it into the chips and make the hardware. And I feel like it was a couple months later, we come back to your studio with the prototype. Here, it's all in here. And you just said, it's not right. The low end's just not right. And I'm like, come on, you really remember exactly what the low end sounded like 2 months ago? I was a little skeptical. It's like, no, it's rolling off the low end. And sure enough, we looked and saw there was a wrong capacitor value in the hardware, and it was rolling off the low end. So I never doubted you again, Jay. That was a good experience.
That was. And now for some more details. I recorded the samples in the room I'm sitting in, right? I mean, I'm in the control room, and the playing was going down in the big room. But I did all the editing in the other room. Long story why, but I do remember that when I was working on it, I remembered, of course, the bandwidth was really good. It was all recorded well. And actually what happened is when you brought it over, the high end was down. It sounded like there was a filter somewhere around 3K steeping down, right?
I might be remembering it backwards, but there was definitely something in the filter was not right. So it might have been the high end, yeah.
Let's take it a step further. You told me that the hardware was the same as the original HR-16. So whoever had those machines were also getting a darker signal than the samples were.
You could be right. I'll trust your memory versus mine. I don't remember that well. I mean, that was the late 80s, so it was a long time ago. But yeah, that was good times.
So let's back up. I remember, I don't know if you'll remember this. So I had an OB-8, a DSX, and a DMX. The OB-8's the synthesizer, the DSX is the sequencer, and the DMX is the drum machine, right?
Yep, yeah.
So that was the very beginning of me using machines. And the expanders came out shortly thereafter. The Oberheim Xpanders you designed, you and Michelle, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they have control voltage inputs and gate inputs. This was pre-MIDI, right?
That's right. I mean, the Xpander, by the time the Xpander came out, it had MIDI. It came out in 1984, but it was designed, the DSX and OB-Xa, and all that was pre-MIDI. And so the DSX had 8 CV and gate outs. So the Xpander was 6 voice. We had 6 CV and gate ins. So you'd be able to directly control the Xpander from the DSX.
With very little latency, if any at all.
But you still noticed some latency. That was another learning experience for me. That was really great. Yeah, no, and what it was the time that the DSX was taking to communicate with the OB-8 was adding some slop to when it would update the CV and gates. So that's when I added the feature so that once you'd programmed it in, you could disconnect the OB-8 so it would just focus on the CV and gates, and then the timing was really, really tight.
You beat me to the punch.
Ah, sorry. See, but I remember that story. But it was really, really helpful because a lot of people think, this is before MIDI. The Oberheim system had a parallel interface. It was 37 pins because the entire processor bus was on there. So most people think a parallel interface is typically faster than serial, which certainly at that time was true. But what wasn't taken into account was how much time was each processor taking to just deal with its housekeeping. And these little Z80 processors, we were working pretty hard. So that was the real education there, was that it was more than just the speed of the interface. You had to take into account the whole system. And in that case, there was a lot of musical examples where it really didn't matter, but for you, it mattered. and then once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. You suddenly become really, really sensitive to any source of latency. So that was another good experience. Yeah, I'd say that was the beginnings of our technical collaboration,
which lasted quite a long time, even to date, to some degree. Okay, let's back up on that. So with the DSX, which was the Oberheim sequencer, and the DMX, the drum machine, all controlled by the OB-8. Well, not necessarily, but typically. In any case, what was the common clock we used? How did we get the DSX and the DMX to lock up in time? We had to have used a common clock.
Yeah, it was pretty simple. It was just on a 1/4-inch jack. There was the pulse, which was 96 pulses per quarter note, was the timing resolution. And which you could make the DSX or the DMX the master, depending on your workflow. And you just take the clock out of one into the other. And if you had quantize on the DSX, because if you recall, you had to decide in advance of recording if you wanted to quantize, which is kind of backwards by today's standards. But it was I think it was the first sequencer that even had quantize. So so you'd say, I want to quantize at 16th notes, and if you played like an 8-bar lick, it would quantize all your playing to 16th notes, and if you hit stop within a 16th note of the end of a bar, it would loop at exactly that resolution, at that point in the song. So a DMX and DSX could loop forever, and it's going to be looping the exact same number of clocks.
Now, when it looped, did we have a set number of bars so it would quantize the time?
Yeah, it would. If quantize was on, it would also quantize when you hit stop, so it would always be right on the beat for the loop. But if you recall, what you do, the idea with the DSX and the DMX is you'd put sections together. It could be just a phrase, or it could be a verse or a bridge, and then you could connect together into songs the different sections. So you'd have like here's my verse, here's my A verse, my B verse, my bridge, whatever, or intro and so on. And then you'd put it together in, what did I call it? Was it a merge or something? I got to look at what it says. I forget now.
Where's the manual?
Yes, it was called merge. I don't know, because these things didn't have names back then. So it was like you had the sequences, which I don't know if we called them. That was just sequence. So you had, up to 10 tracks of the sequence, and then a merge was a list of sequences. So I think you typically would call it a song. So
I just thought of something. When we were talking about how the master clock would be, in the best of all worlds, it would have been an external clock clocking both, which did eventually happen when I started using the Dr. Click.
The Dr. Click, yes.
Right, because that had multiple outputs for the same clock.
That was mainly useful because different machines in that time had different divisions. So I think the Dr. Click was real handy because I think, for example, the Lindrum was 48 pulses per quarter. We were 96. I think there was some Roland that was 24. I mean, they were all multiples of 2, so I think the Dr. Click would put out clocks of all the different divisions, so you could run lots of different devices. But I don't think the Dr. Click made the timing any more accurate than just using the DSX or DMX.
Well, I beg I beg to differ. Because now I just thought of something that I probably did before I had the Dr. Click. Okay, you knowing me very well, which would I have as the master clock? Either the sequencer or the drum machine, and why?
Drum machine.
Uh-uh.
No? Okay.
Why?
Why? I just assumed you'd imagine if the drum machine was the master, it would be the tightest timing-wise. So why would you do the sequencer?
I'm going to explain. Because of the latency of the sequencer to the OB-8, the slop and the latency back to the synthesizer, meaning back to the OB-8, there's going to be a latency issue right there. So I'd rather have the drum machines receive the clock secondary because it's not going to have that kind of latency. It would be more accurate. And we're talking a real small amount here of timing.
It'd be tiny difference, but yeah. Yeah.
Is that logical or not?
Logical. Of course it's logical.
Hey, we're talking like we always have, man. Which brings up all kinds of subjects. But in any case, now for the key to all this. So I said one day, Marcus, you know, the OB-8 is kind of sloppy in comparison to the drum machine. But I didn't make a big deal out of this until we got the expanders. And then I said, Marcus, you've explained to me how data interrupts work. And that's what the clock and the sequencer doing all of its work to try to spit the notes out as fast as they can, right? But the OB-8 being sloppy, you told me after you play the main keyboard sound, if you can get that sound on the expanders, which we could, or similar, or even better, you said pull the umbilical cord from the sequencer from the OB-8. So that way, all the data interrupts went away, and the expanders and the drum machine, time-wise, was tight. Really good.
It was really tight. And actually, I had to do a firmware update to add that feature because before then, if you disconnect the umbilical cord, the DSX just stopped working because its whole point was to be connected to an OB-8. So we added a mode. I don't know if you remember. It says when you first power on the DSX, it just says Oberheim DSX, and there's 2 asterisks on either side of the display on that little 16-character display. And so now the new mode was if you pull the plug, those asterisks turn to 2 exclamation marks, I think. So it's just basically indicating I'm not hooked up to an OB-8. So you can't record any new sequences, but now I'd still let it play so that you could play the CV outs. So that feature was added for you.
We should have put a switch in because I was constantly pulling out the connector, plugging it in, pulling it out, plugging it in, and I did think, well, at least I know the guy that designed it. So if the connector breaks, Marcus can fix it. Anyway, man, it was a lot of fun, and it was a good learning experience.
But I think in the last version of OB-8, we put a feature on page 2 of the OB-8, once it had MIDI, that would allow you to disconnect the 37 pin from the panel. In the very last version, I'm pretty sure someone watching this will correct me. Again, that was 1983 or so. So 40 years. I should be cut some slack on if I'm remembering it quite right.
Hey, brother, you and I together. It's going to take both of us to remember some of these stories in full, right?
Yeah.
And I should note at this point, if anybody has comments, please chime in, and Marcus and I will do our best to answer them, hopefully in another Zoom video. And while I'm on that wrap, if you end up liking the video, please subscribe, and leave a comment. So I got that out of the way. I know everybody says that, and I'm kind of a bad guy when I forget to do that stuff for someone else. But now I'm doing it for everybody because I want it.
Yeah. It's a good reason. Yeah.
So you and I were talking one day about cracked plugs. And anybody out there that uses a DAW, you know, there's a lot of cracks out there on torrent sites to get the plugs for free. Well, of course, that's not a good idea. But, you know, some guys would actually buy the plug, you know, buy the application for their DAW, you know, let's say it's drum samples or whatever, and then they use the crack so they wouldn't have to worry about dragging their iLock around with them if they were going to other studios. And there is logic to that. At least they bought it.
Right.
But you and I were talking about the cracks, and then I said, well, how about free music? I mean, Napster was happening at the time, and free music was available anyway, you know. So I said, well, what if I got some cracks? It gets made up for by the fact people are stealing my music. And what was your logic, man? What was your answer? It was really good.
I'm sure I came up with something good, but now you're testing me. I don't remember what I said, but you have to remind me. I mean, it have to be some sort of two wrongs don't make a right kind of a thing. But
it was, but it was more intellectual.
Oh, all right. What do you remember? What did I say?
I actually don't remember. I was hoping you'd remember. But, you know, you got me thinking, and look, I know it's wrong to do that. We all do. You know, so there's two wrongs don't make a right.
That's the basic thing. My parents brought me up right. I'm afraid I'm kind of a goody two-shoes on that. I mean, I can tell you, actually, I may have told the story. I remember I was 13 years old. I was kind of small for my age at 13. And I was going to the movies with my dad. And we're in line back in the day to go buy the tickets. And as we're in line waiting to get the tickets, I say to my dad, it's like, you know, you could buy me a 12 and under ticket. They're not going to know. And he turned to me, he said, but we'll know.
Wow. That's well put.
That was deep. And it was like, oh yeah, I guess that's the deal. It's not just like what you can get away with. There is basic right and wrong, and it shouldn't be judged by whether or not you can get away with it. So that was a nice early lesson that has served me well. I'm kind of goody two shoes.
Hey man, I get it. And the older I get, the more I grow up, kind of.
Yeah.
I'm an idiot. I'm a child. High resolution. You must have programmed that sound.
Oh, no. It's too nasty to be for I did the pretty sounds.
You know, that's funny, man, about the ticket thing on another level. When I finally became a senior, I forgot to get the senior discount at the theater.
Oh, man. The day I turned 55, I was ordering off the Denny's 55 menu. Come on. I'm gonna take advantage of those opportunities.
I'm going out of order here, but I gotta bring this up.
All right.
I don't want to hit my dig me button. I want you to. Okay.
Okay.
And the story goes like this. Some people have the gift of perfect pitch. And the way that's usually acquired is when they're young, their parents or their music teacher teaches them the name of the notes. And I'm not sure what the age cutoff point is in general, but if you're not taught the name of the notes at a very young age, you really can't develop perfect pitch. You can develop relative pitch, which is what you and I have done, and constantly practice whether we know it or not. That's a whole other story. But the point to this is there's a thing called golden ears. And once again, you can't be taught it. You either have the gift or you don't. And I don't want to hit my dig me button, man. So
I'll tell you, I have an opinion about that. I think, you know, obviously there's the whole spectrum of people's listening abilities, right? I mean, there's from, you know, one extreme you could be tone deaf or fully deaf. Clearly, that's a severe impairment to if you want to be hearing. But I think that some people have similar to the concept of perfect pitch. Some people have a better absolute memory of tonal reference. So the example of like you hearing, months later, you hearing that something wasn't right in the drum machine when we did the HR-16B, says to me that your tonal anchor of what things should sound like is more acute than most people. I mean, most people, their hearing is relative, right? So it's, obviously our brain adjusts how we're hearing things if we just came out of a loud concert or things were very quiet. I mean, there's the obvious dynamic range type things, but I think some people are more attuned to kind of absolute harmonic content. Just like I think some people visually some really have a really keen eye for color, right? I mean, if you showed me something that was red today and showed me something a similar red a week from now, I'd probably just say it's red. But there's other people who might go, no, that's a slightly different hue than the red I saw before, right? Does that make sense? And it's just like how some people are more musical, some people are good at sports or whatever. I think your absolute reference tonally is really well focused, and that's how it is that you hear things that sometimes other people don't.
It makes sense, and there's a lot of examples of this. Do you remember the time we were at Village and we were testing a bunch of reverbs? We were working on, what did I say it was? What was the reverb, the main one, the first one?
The QuadraVerb, maybe.
Was it the QuadraVerb? I think so.
That was the first Alesis reverb I worked on. They'd already done the MIDI verb and MIDI verb 2, and the QuadraVerb was the first one we worked on.
And I remember that we went to Village, and the reason we did is they had an Eventide 2016, I think. They had a 250. What was that thing that looked like R2D2 or something?
EMT 250. Was that what that was called?
It?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, it was like a tall thing with the levers on it.
Right. And what was the non-linear one that Phil Collins used on the drums? It was like gated kind of.
I don't know what he used, but did they have a Quantec?
No. If you told me the name, I'd remember.
I don't know. We'd have to look it up. Yeah, right.
Right. Here's the deal. So we went to Village because we wanted to listen to these different reverbs and see if we could capture what was going on sonically, right? And when we were doing that, we had the QuadraVerb up and we were playing around with it. And I said, hold it. Did you hear that? There's some kind of pitch around 4K. There's some kind of weird anomaly. You remember?
Yeah. It was a problem with the anti-aliasing filter. Wasn't we were getting we were getting clock noise from whatever our source was, and which was above. It was like basically 48K clock, which we couldn't hear, but it was creating aliasing in the QuadraVerb, if I recall. Do you remember
that all the guys in the room were musicians? It was Alan Wald. Who were the other guys that were there?
Come on, it was the 80s. It was the 80s. I don't remember. There were people there, yes.
Anyway, when I said that, I said, so you guys hear that, right? I mean, there's a problem, Marcus. And everybody went, well, hear what? And I said, you can't hear that? And everybody went, no. 8 other musicians. And that's when I found out I have golden ears. You don't know you have a gift until other people can't do it.
But the thing that's interesting, and I think there's even been some courses on this, much like learning relative pitch, if you start to learn what to listen for, you can really improve your golden ears. You have the natural gift, but I know through that era really taught me a lot about what to listen for, how to listen. So, I mean, that's where I was able to, for me, being able to like actually hear the difference of the different guitar amp modeling approaches, for example. I started to be able to hear the artifacts in a different way, because you just you can learn to listen for what you're not listening for. I don't know if that makes sense. You just do it naturally. Some of us have to practice it.
You know what? I was talking to Michael Omartian the other day, affectionately known as Omar.
How's he doing? How's Omar doing?
He's doing really good.
I miss him. Say hi for me.
Oh, man. I will, man. I will. He's such a great guy. Don't let me forget to tell you the story about a voicing he used on a Jermaine Jackson song.
I did a Jermaine Jackson record with Omar.
Tell me I'm not dreaming. Tell me I'm not dreaming.
See, now you want me to remember the name of a song from the 80s. I'll have to go check it out. Let me see. I'll look it up. See if.
You know what's really good? I mean, really weird? I remembered out of nowhere one day, I was just sitting around at the piano. No, I wasn't even at the piano. And a tune popped into my head. Is this a C? Do you have anything to check? Is this a C?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. That's my way to cheat perfect pitch. So the bass line goes bump, ba-dum, bump, bump, da-dum, dum, 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 da-dum, dum. Okay, that's the bass line, right? And that's in C. Okay, C, right? Okay, so the first chord, C7, 9, right? So the voicing is G, C, no, G, B flat, D, E. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the bass line continues, and the voicing is G, C, D flat, F.
Still over a C bass?
Yeah. Right. Can you believe he used that chord?
That's why he's Omar.
He is. So I was talking to Omar about this, and actually we were talking about something else. I just mentioned the fact that his perfect pitch, everybody's got a different level of perfect pitch. I know two guys with absolute, and if you don't know what absolute pitch is, that's when you can really, A440, A441, 442, 443. You're so acute. What's the phrase I'm looking for?
Precise.
Your brain just, for some reason or another, their brains can remember the exact pitch of A440 versus A441 and so on. Rick Beato's kid, Dylan.
Oh, yeah.
Rick taught him this from the get-go. That video is very good.
That's amazing.
For anyone that hasn't seen it, it's just unreal. Anyway, I think Omar has it too, but I know Jerry Hay has it. And we tested him one night, and he was right on the money. The piano, he says the piano's 441. Gary Grant went over to the piano with a tuner, and it was 441. Ridiculous. So I'm talking to Omar about this, and I said, man, you've got such a great gift. I really wish I had been taught how to have it when I was young. He says, it's a nightmare, man. He says, you're better off without it. And I said, well, I don't know about that, but he says, man, there's times when it just drives me crazy. And so then we were talking about that song, and I said, with your acute sense of pitch, how did you come up with that chord to use? I mean, that's like a jazz chord times 1,000. He says, just what I heard at the time. And I said, man, well, it sure got my attention.
Well, Foster's got perfect pitch also, right?
Not anymore.
Oh, really? Well, he did in the 80s. I remember doing a session with him because I always thought, boy, I wish I had perfect pitch. And I was doing some session. I don't remember who it was for, but it was doing early tracks. And I'm just doing sounds because obviously he's Foster. He can play anything. And it was a real interesting part that he was trying out. And then I think the singer said they wanted to try it in a different key. And so I said, well, I can just transpose the keyboard. And I transposed the keyboard for him so you just play the same part. and you could tell it took like every ounce of his concentration to play the part, but for his ears to be hearing it in a different key. It was just so unnatural for him, and so that would be an area where I would imagine it being kind of a curse, because it's just like the keys have to be the right pitch or it's just wrong, So, but he's Foster, so it's probably faster and easier for him to just play it in a different key. So
it is, and that's just the way, that you're right, man. And they can't play the keyboard if it's in another pitch, though their mind can't take it, right?
It doesn't work. So I imagine guitar players who are into alternate tuning, they must have a way where their brain just knows what the tuning is. I mean, if you're just dropping to E flat or an open tuning or whatever, their brain must automatically know. It's like they readjust because they know that the guitar's been retuned. But a keyboard, a piano, certainly, typically, you don't retune it. So it would not be something you wouldn't learn to think, oh, right, my C is an E flat now,
How about if we stopped the session and called the piano tuner and said, well, you got to tune it up a whole step. I know I'm an idiot. Okay. So.
Can I tell you another Rake Golden Ear story that's didn't go the way I thought it would, but it was, I thought it was a real testament to you in how confident you are in your hearing, but it was also a real learning experience and caused me to study a notion called sensory transference. And just for some background, it's recognizing you really have to come to terms that everything we experience is just our brain's interpretation of all the input it's receiving, right? That's why, if you look at some fun optical illusions and things like that, how we can fool our brain into thinking something's there that's not, and so on. Because our brain is what interprets what we're going to experience. And we take all of that input for our brain to decide what's going on, right? Like if someone has vertigo, it can be that their inner ear is sending signals that don't correlate with what your eyes see, right? I mean, why is it that we could get dizzy? It's like your brain has to pick what input is it that it's going to accept as real, right? So it's a long setup, but disconnecting the story, you're notorious for spending forever to get like a drum sound. And you were like up all night trying to EQ the snare drum on a track to get it just perfect. And you're like moving the parametric band just slightly and listening and a little bit this. And it's just like all these really fine adjustments that you're working on until you felt like, okay, now the snare is right. And you looked down and you saw that the EQ was bypassed. And what's so significant about that story is I have no doubt you actually were hearing the snare change. And the point is that your brain was taking the tactile response. You're so well trained, you know what should happen when you turn that knob up just a little bit. So your brain has this input. You know the knob changed. And that contributes to what you're hearing. So when people people often get wrong why something sounds different, but I never doubt when people do hear something different. But it's that we have to recognize that our brain is taking everything in, right? So,
Absolutely.
So, people will decide they hear a difference with a different battery or with a different power cord or all kinds of things that don't seem to make logical sense. But when you recognize that that person probably did hear a difference because everything of their preconceived notions, all their past experience, what's happening physically, what they see with their eyes, what they smell, all of it contributes to what something sounds like. I mean, for me, a real Hammond organ sounds better when I'm in the room with the Leslie. And I think part of that is because I love the smell of the dust getting kicked up on an old Leslie, right? That's part of the experience. It's like, it's all part of it. How an instrument feels changes how it sounds, right? And so all of these things contribute. And what was great is that you could recognize, I know I heard something and the EQ was off. That's most people wouldn't admit that, but it's actually really telling in how complex it is in our brain deciding what it is we're hearing. So,
I learned from that. That probably happened a couple of times. I was so focused on the pot that I didn't look at the EQ. Now, if I had actually just made a sweep and made a move, I would have gone, the EQ's switched out, right?
No, that's where your brain would go, now it's so far off it doesn't compute, right? If you'd done suddenly you put a massive amount of gain, you'd go, my hand says it happened, my ears say it said it didn't, And so your brain now says, wait a minute. Just like getting dizzy when you're getting different signals. But what was interesting is you were making very subtle changes. And those very subtle changes allowed your brain to change what you were hearing because it was in range, it's interesting.
Was it looped? Was it a drum sample or was it a real snare?
Oh, back then it had to have been, it may have been a drum machine on tape, but you were listening on tape. But it was, as I recall, and it was just playing through, and you were EQing.
Yeah, that's weird. That's weird because I would have known if something was happening if I just moved the pot a little bit more.
If you'd moved it more, your brain would have said, now wait a minute, right? I've done that. It's like if I'm trying to you're trying to align sound to picture and you're doing these really fine adjustments and you're thinking, well, maybe it's right now, maybe it's not. And then you might find you're not actually, maybe you're adjusting the wrong thing or it's just a reminder. That's just how our brain works. Nothing is real. Everything is our brain's interpretation of what sensory input we get.
Well, dig this. It seems as we age, because this not only happened to Foster, it's happening to a lot of my friends. And if you ask your buddies that have perfect pitch, they're going to tell you one of two things. Either it's weaning or waning, it's slowly not accurate, and not slowly not accurate. There'll be times, well, I'll tell you how Foster found out. He was doing a takedown of a tune without piano, without any keyboard, because perfect pitch guys can do that. And he was writing out the changes. Then when he went to the piano to play it, half of the stuff was a half step flat. Half of the stuff was a half step flat. And it freaked him out. But there's times when he's kind of got it back. Like if I tune him up, I'll say, okay, where do you think a G is, or whatever note? If he's wrong, I go, no, that's not. It's, a half step flat, whatever. And then as soon as he gets going and he's got the pitch sense again, I can play the complicated stuff and he's on it. He just needs to get retuned. And that's his situation. Other guys say the same thing. It's slowly going away. Very few guys have been able to retain it at the level it was.
A half step's not too bad.
Oh, man. You know, okay, how about this? Jerry Hay plays trumpet. You know, it's a B-flat instrument, so it's a step off, right? How does he looking at the note that's a step higher than what the sound is? Right?
Would be, yeah, seems like that would be tough. Again, I would equate it to like a guitar player in that I think how they see it is that the staff itself is retuned. They don't care that I'm going to call a B flat a C. Whereas for a keyboard player, it's very different because the layout is so illogical, but it's what we all learned, right? So if I'm like playing a C major and I'm hearing an E flat major, it doesn't make sense. But if I imagine that the notation is transposed, just like if I tune down my guitar, I would think someone with perfect pitch doesn't mind if I tune down to E flat, they're automatically adjusting, right? Because everything is just relative on a fretboard anyway. So
that's true. That's true.
That's my hunch. So I think the thing is, if you were playing trumpet and when you valve a certain note, you heard a different pitch, that would throw you off.
Big time.
Right? But if it's just like, okay, the note on the paper, that's just an abstract representation. What's important is what I do here has to sound right. That's why it was so weird transposing the keyboard for Foster is I know what it's supposed to sound like if I'm playing, you know, a B flat major 9 and I'm hearing something else. That just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't fit. Okay, Chuck Finley has perfect pitch. His perfect pitch, he relates it to trumpet. When he was a kid, he thought C on a trumpet is C, where it's not, right? When you're playing C on a trumpet, right? It's a B flat, right? So he had to learn that at a young age. So his perfect pitch, he's a step off compared to everybody else, a whole step off. He just learned it that way. So he's then got to think about the transposition. Bizarre, huh?
That's bizarre.
I met another guy that learned to play, he's got perfect pitch and he's a keyboard player, and then he learned to play tenor sax. Well, he didn't have a teacher, so he learned the instrument in C. So when he's reading music, he has to transpose the whole step on the fly. Dig this one. Last perfect pitch story. When I was 14 and I started playing guitar, one of the first musicians I met is a great bass player by the name of Jim Allen. And he has perfect pitch. And of course, I go, what's that? And of course, you know, he explained it. And I said, well, I want it. He says, well, you can't have it unless you learn at a very young age when your brain can take this in. And anyway, I said, well, what can I do? He said, you can learn relative. And that's how I got into relative pitch and have been practicing every day ever since then with it, right? Using relative pitch. Jim, this is the point of the story. Jim was on a gig in an old church that had a piano that was about 100 years old, and it hadn't been tuned in a long time. The pitch was not only between the cracks, a quarter tone-ish off or so, it was really out of tune. Whatever you called the C, whatever it was, none of the other notes, were correlating. So it's flat by a quarter tone-ish, and the notes are all crazy out of tune. In the middle of the first set, he threw up on the stand. He was on stage, man. He was playing along, and his brain couldn't take it and made him barf.
It's like, it's audio vertigo.
Right. Like Omartian said, it's a curse, too.
Yeah.
Stefan Olofsson is one of my partners, Stefan and Peppy Olofsson, on my YouTube channel stuff. And they're great musicians, man. And they're great guys. And their mom, incredible human being. She runs my life. And Stefan's got some questions. How fast can real-time latency through an ADC DAW-DAC become theoretically and practically?
Good question. Yes. So So right, we think about if you're recording on DAW, and you want to monitor with your computer, latency is always something you have to wrestle with. The reality is the latency of converters used to be an issue. Today, obviously it depends on what converters people use, but if you are at a fairly high sample rate and you're using converters with low group delay, you can have the total latency of your converters be certainly under a millisecond. So usually the bigger culprit is your DAW, and your DAW is going to be a function of what buffer size you have. Because essentially, a computer, old signal processors would process one sample at a time. You literally could have an old DSP where the latency of the digital side is just a single sample. But that's very inefficient in how processors work today. So the way a DAW works, this is just it's a simplistic explanation, but it works on blocks of samples. So if you set your block size to, let's say, 128 samples, then the DAW is going to process 128 samples at a time. So that means it has to receive in 128 samples through whatever interface, and then do whatever it's going to do with it. Let's say you've got a plug-in with some EQ or whatever, and then spit out those 128 samples, right?
Right.
If you're sampling at 48 kilohertz, or just to make the math simpler, if you were sampling at 43 and change kilohertz, 128 samples would be 3 milliseconds. And depending on how many times that buffer size has to buffer in your system and through your interfaces, you'll have some multiple of 3 milliseconds. So you can see if you've got converters that are under a millisecond, the DAW buffer size is the biggest factor. So if you've got a really fast computer, if you're not using a lot of processing, while you're tracking, in other words, if you can keep the workload your computer has to do to a minimum, like not playing back 120 tracks at the same time you're recording, then you can usually set the buffer size quite low. And of course, if you're at a higher sample rate, that cuts your latency in half if your computer can handle the small buffer size. So, for example, if you can record at 96 kilohertz and have a 32 sample buffer, now your buffer size is only a third of a millisecond. So, right? So those are the trade-offs you have to do. So it's the cumulative effect of how much latency in your A to D, in how much latency is in your interface protocol, right? How you're getting to the computer, then the buffer size of the computer itself, then back through your protocol to your D to A. So I haven't done measurements lately. I'm not sure currently what's the best case people can do, but in theory, it seems like you should be able to get that whole thing down to a pretty low amount. But it's been a long time since I've done that. Back in our guitar port days, when we did guitar port at line 6, that was one of our key things, was to try to make that latency as low as possible. And that came out in like the year 2001. So 20 years ago, computing power of 20 years ago, we were able to get latency down to, from analog to analog, down to 5.7 milliseconds through a computer. And that was kind of a breakthrough to get to that level. Nowadays, I would think you could get it faster than that, but I'm not sure where the bottlenecks are. I'd have to do some investigation.
That brings up the point of the amount of samples that your computer is set to for your DAW. Meaning in Pro Tools, let's see, 128, 64, we can get down to 64. I think that's the lowest number. But the second you start adding plugs, the system's going to start to drag. So this is a whole video I'm going to do.
Well, but here's the key thing. if it were me, I would be thinking about it differently when I'm tracking a real instrument or vocal versus when I'm working in the box on the tune. So what you want to do, let's say you're doing a vocal or a guitar and you want the absolute lowest latency. Well, then turn off all the plugins. Render your mix down to 2 tracks if you want. Make it so your DAW hardly has to work at all, so you can set the buffer as small as possible and now track your part. Now you want to mix your tune, have a big buffer. I mean, how critical is your latency when you're mixing? It's not important. You know, if it takes an extra 10 milliseconds to hear the EQ change when you turn a knob in your mix, that's not a big deal. Everything can be late, right, when you're mixing. So essentially, you know, I don't know if many people think about using their buffer size dynamically like that, but I try to set buffer size based on what my application is. If I'm now mixing a ton of tracks and want a ton of plugins, then just have a really big buffer and you can get more horsepower out of your computer.
Are you sure it's not me talking? Because that's exactly what I would say. And that's going to be in the video.
Then I probably learned it from you.
Now, you thought about it just like I did, man. Regarding the buffer size being large when you mix, setting the amount of samples that it takes before the DAW actually reacts when you hit play, I've told Pro Tools, well, Avid, a number of times, why don't you increase that to as large as we can take it? Let us allow, you know, more than 1,024 samples. Double it, quadruple it. Give us all those options. Because when you hit the button, so you have to wait a second or two before you hear audio. No big deal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I think that it's a trade-off. I mean, most time people in mixing, they still might be making some adjustments. So, I mean, if at some point it's like, you know, you're moving a pan pot on the screen and it takes a second before you hear it change, that'd probably be annoying. But I do think you could have many tens of milliseconds and not really care. So that's what I would do.
I agree. And there is a way to avoid latency altogether. And I do this all the time. You can have a separate monitor path. If you've got access to your analog input signal, let's monitor that. If you have to punch, then just barely turn up the level of what you're punching to, you know, like a guitar track. Just turn it up enough where you can barely hear it so you know where you are. Or go on another track and just let the first track where you're going to punch, just erase everything past it if you're not going to keep it, or draw a level drop, you know, on that particular channel, or a mute, and then you're fine. So there are ways around it, and I'm going to do a video on that, of course. So let's get to the ADAT.
What's that?
Okay. Yeah, what is that? So you always, from that point on, or I guess it was that point on, was that the first project we did together? Or was it the HR-16?
The HR-16B was before that. And again, it's like we were informally working together from the Oberheim days. Like you said, talking about bypassing the 37 pin and, you know, and things like that. And then the HR-16B and QuadraVerb we worked on in the Alesis days. Those both predated the ADAT. But the ADAT was the biggie.
I was your personal beta tester and consultant. I mean, you know, with someone like you, man, that's off the bell curve with their IQ, a lot of times, guys like you and another friend of mine, Bill Evans, you're going to love the programs he's developed.
Bill's amazing.
You know Bill, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's gotten 2 PhDs on the first 2 versions of the program. And he's working on the 3rd one right now, and it's almost done, and it's called the Graydonizer. The reason being is I taught him the importance of phase, and he never even thought of that. Because guys that are as brilliant as you, a lot of times you skip over something that may not come to mind while you're dealing with all the math to get the computer program to work, right? So in the case of the ADAT, when you asked me to join as a beta tester consultant, of course I'm there for, I'm always there for you. So the very first thing I said to you, right after you had called, right when we were talking about it, I said, Marcus, I don't know hardly anything about digital recording. And by the way, you really got me on the right track. You taught me everything I've needed to know. I was way ahead of the curve as far as other people goes. So I thank you for that, of course.
My pleasure.
And yeah, man. And I said, Marcus, how about we have a true analog bypass where we can jump the converters? So whenever we're recording anything analog, instead of monitoring through the converters with the converter latency and whatever the buffer latency is, we simply go from the analog input to the analog output while the A to D and D to A is doing their job, well, just the A to D converter. So we monitor over it, so there's no latency at all. And you said, great idea, man. And I said, can you do it? He said, yeah, we can do that. I said, well, how much is it going to cost? He says about 10 cents a channel. I mean, you said about 10 cents a channel.
It was yeah, it's probably it probably cost a little more than that, but it's not that expensive. But it was the right thing to do because, at that time, Delta Sigma converters were brand new. They had some great characteristics, but also introduced latency on the A to D side. There was group delay. And that was definitely the surefire way to do it. And what's nice is, unlike the issue you were talking about before of if you're going to have a separate audio analog path for monitoring, what do you do with punching in? Since this switching was built right into the ADAT, if you punched in, it would just automatically switch from the DAC playback of what was what you were listening to, and then you'd punch in and it would switch the analog switch to take the analog input right to the output. So you could potentially perceive a very slight click depending on the audio signal when you would punch in, but that was only a monitoring artifact. The actual punch of the digital data was perfectly crossfaded and so on. But the point is, we achieved the main goal that you'd asked for, which is, if I'm recording, I should just have the analog in going right to the analog out. So there's truly zero latency in an ADAT when you're monitoring the output to the ADAT while you're recording. And then when you're playing back, you're hearing the DAC.
I don't remember hearing a click. So maybe you is there any way you could have faded up the input to get by the click?
I mean, it's an analog switch. I mean, it's just like you could get a click if you mute one channel on your analog board while you unmute another one. I mean, it's just, assuming it's not VCAs or anything, it's a switch. So if one waveform is, way at the top, and right when you switch, the other waveform is way at the bottom, well, that's what you're going to hear. But it's, I think in practice, it wasn't an actual problem. I don't recall anyone ever noticing or complaining about it. It's just switching a signal,
Maybe because, well, I'll tell you one thing. I would go to input mode with singers, meaning like when Bill Champlin, when we were doing the version of After the Love Has Gone for my album, we would, I do this with every singer. I back up about 6 bars, even 8 bars. And as soon as I see the singer starting to sing, I put the recorder in input mode.
That's why you never heard it then, because you're already in input mode. So you're already in input mode, and now you punch. I mean, basically, from a monitoring standpoint, nothing changes when you punch in. On the digital side, once you punched in, it's going to fade out what was already. I mean, it's quite fast. I forget, didn't we have it's a 5 millisecond? It's actually adjustable how much crossfade you want when you punch. But I think the default is 5 milliseconds. What was on the DAC fades out, and what's on the A to D fades in. So there's absolutely no chance of a click when you punch in on the digital side. So,
and it's not going to click on the audio. It's just a click in the monitoring. It has nothing to do with the record part of the chain. It's
purely monitoring. Yeah, if you were to, it'd be easy to test. I mean, if you were to have just recorded a steady tone on tape, and then put a different tone on, or actually even silence on the input, and switch that switch, depending on where the waveform is, you might hear a very slight tick. But
what was the crossfade time?
I'd have to look it up. If I recall, we set it up so there were like 4 different choices. I'm from memory, it's hard to remember. I think it was in the range of between 5 to 20 milliseconds you could choose.
And I never heard a problem.
No. I think whatever it is we set as a default, it just worked. And it was just like, there's really no need to adjust it. So we just left it. So, but it is adjustable. There's some hidden button. Someone will add in the comments and they'll say, Marcus, you forgot. You hold this button and do this, and that's how you change it.
You know what? I don't remember where that was in the program. But I think I just set it to the fastest point and never had a problem, right?
You wouldn't have a problem. Yeah, it worked. It worked great.
Do you realize that I think the ADAT is the only digital recorder that actually bypasses the converters and goes from input to output, so there's no latency? I know there's sound cards. Stefan Olofsson, one of my partners on the YouTube channel, he's got a sound card so he can monitor the input side, but when you punch in, now you've got a problem because the level that's set on the sound card is not going to be the same as the playback, and I actually don't know how he deals with that. But I think we're the only digital tape machine ever that had this function.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the others, but at least we know we had it. I mean, it makes sense to put it on a recorder. It's a little trickier in the DAW environment. The thing about a recorder is, if it's doing its job right, when you record something, the output should just be exactly what came in on the input, right? There's no level adjustment from out there, right? There's no trimmers. It's like I put in a signal of the level X, it should just come out exactly the same. So if in that machine where you've got the inputs and outputs all there, you put in this analog switch, it should be equivalent. Now, in the case of a DAW, there's no reason you couldn't make an audio interface, for example, that would have that same feature. That would basically take, analog input 1 goes to its A to D, but also goes to an analog switch so that it can go to output 1, right? But the thing is, in a DAW, you may not want exactly what came in input 1 to come just out output 1. Chances are, output 1 is part of your stereo mix, which is what I'm listening to everything on. So now you end up having to have kind of an intermediate step, which is that here's my analog monitoring that I want to now analog sum with my stereo mix, but have it automatically do it the right way for whatever I was expecting to hear. It becomes more complicated because you're mixing in the box. If you're mixing in the computer, it becomes harder to do. So, but maybe in the end, sadly for you, not enough people complain about it. I mean, if this was a real requirement, if people complained about it, then I think manufacturers would have to come up with other solutions. But people seem to, for the most part, just be tolerant to the latencies in their system and just work with it.
You're missing one factor in the thought chain. People don't know there is another way to do this where there's no delay.
If they're not asking for it, I mean, as a general rule for most manufacturers, unfortunately, if someone's not asking for it, if enough people aren't asking for it, then the effort's not going to be put in to do it.
You know, there's two situations that have to do with that. First of all, who's ever the decision maker at all these DAW companies is not a musician or a singer. Second of all, there is a way around it.
There is a way. There's several different ways around it. I think maybe I'm empathetic to the manufacturers, having been one for a while too, in that, again, the solution with the ADAT, we were able to do a single solution and it solves the problem completely, because you expect an output jack to just sound the same as an input jack. And because now everyone uses DAWs differently, everyone has different favorite interfaces, they use interfaces differently. Sure, you could mix outside the box and so on, but not a lot of people do nowadays. So it just means solving it in such a broad way becomes much more difficult. It's doable, but that's unfortunately, I think, why most of the manufacturers just go, we're just going to punt and let people deal with it.
You know, here was the thing in our era. We were going right from analog to digital. So we were going from analog tape right to digital. So there wasn't this problem. People would have noticed if there was.
Right. There was zero latency because that's what analog is. And that was, so that was an era when we had to recognize that we might be introducing a problem by having latency. So we better pay attention to it,
I'm tied into Avid. I'm kind of a part-time beta tester, and, I'm tied in and glad to be. And of course, I've requested my guy is not the decision maker. He's real high up in the chain, but he's not the guy to make the decision. So he's not been able to pull it off. There is a mode in Pro Tools that's been there from day one that is a direct monitoring option. And I don't understand what this is supposed to do. Okay, it's under the... I know. I'm just mentioning it because I'm trying to get everybody that's watching these videos to contact their DAW companies to ask for this, which is exactly what you said. Nobody's asking. Well, because I say they don't know better. They're used to it. But everything would change for the best if this was available. And this mode in Pro Tools is called PEC/Direct Input Monitoring. Direct Style Input Monitoring. To me, that means we get to jump the converters and just get analog in, analog out.
Style. It says style, so I'm not sure.
Oh, style. Okay. How was latency? Oh, we talked about latency compensation done on the ADAT. I mean, you had another head to see in the future.
Oh yeah, that's a really long, complicated story, which is kind of interesting. But the net result is simply, in the ADAT itself, there's a huge amount of latency because you have to read a complete rotation of the drum of data before you can write the new data in. But all the latency is compensated for, so because we get the advantage that if you're listening to a track on your ADAT, again, you don't care that it's been 40 milliseconds since that data was read off tape. You only care when you hear it. It's like, absolutely. I just heard it, and if I play along with what I'm hearing, and we align perfectly that exactly when you heard it is exactly where it should align back with the tape, then we're good to go. So, well, think of it this way. Remember, in the analog world, in order to record in sync with what's on tape, we have to make the record head be a playback head, right? That's right. Because if we listen to the playback head, we're going to hear everything way too early. We're going to be if we listen to the playback head while we're recording, we're going to be hearing, we'll hear the kick drum, right? Well, in that case, the playback head's after the record head, right? So we would be late, right? In the ADAT, the playback head is before the record head. We play the data. We read the data off the tape, and then we spit that data out the DAC. And then, if you were to, let's just say you took channel 1's DAC output and plugged it right into channel 2's A to D input, right? You're literally doing an analog bounce, right?
Right.
Then what's happening is the playback head happens before. We get the data. It does all the de-interleaving and error correction if needed and so on. There's all kinds of mumbo jumbo that happens inside. Eventually it comes out the DAC, and then it's going to come back and go through the A to D and now get interleaved and error correction words added, etc., and then put back on tape. And that whole process happens such that when we put it back on tape, we're putting it back now exactly where the playback head was some time ago, because that's when we recorded out. So you could do an analog copy from track 1 to track 2 on an ADAT, and they'll be perfectly aligned.
How did you deal with recording backwards when it already happened? How did you place it in the future?
It's a drum, right? It's using a VHS transport, but with a custom head on the rotary drum, custom head stack with a rotary transformer, custom speed. The drum is spinning 50 times a second, right? So it's 20 milliseconds for a drum to do one rotation. It creates this. What you're doing, it's as if the tape is running much faster than it is. That's the notion of a helical scan, right? If you think about how fast is the head on this drum going across the tape, well, the drum's rotating 50 times a second while the tape is moving forward, right? So you end up with all of these diagonal tracks layered over each other, right? And not layered, they're not on top of each other. They're spaced, right? The tape is wrapped 180 degrees around the drum, right? So imagine the tape is not even moving, and the head is at an angle. I think it's 6 degrees or near 6 degrees. So if I spin a drum on this long rectangle, and the drum's at a 6 degree angle, the head's gonna start out near the bottom of the tape here, and then by the time it gets to that 180 degrees, it's gonna be near the top of the tape. Does that make sense? You get this diagonal line. So now if I move the tape slowly, I'm gonna have all of these diagonal lines parallel to each other, right? Mm-hmm. Now imagine that you place the read head and the write head, there's 2 read heads, 2 write heads. The 2 read heads are 180 degrees apart because the tape is wrapped halfway around the drum. So one read head goes around, then the other one. And then 90 degrees from that are 2 write heads. The write heads are positioned vertically in a different place so that the drum has to rotate 2 1/4 times before the write head is now where the read head used to be. So now we can put the data right back where it was when we played it back. Much more information than anyone possibly needs to know in this day and age, since we don't record anything on tape. But it's kind of fun. Actually, wait. Hear what I found? Here's something that's cool. ADAT white paper, inside ADAT. I found this. I wrote this, I don't remember. This is a long time ago. But it was basically explains the crossfading. Look at that. Oh, it's 10 millisecond increments. Found the crossfading that you could set. And I think it talks about digital buffers and the track width. And I don't know if there's any pictures. Nope, no pictures.
How about the whole box you have with all the old paperwork from it? It's like, 20 books worth of information?
Some stacks. I was just looking through of old notes. Keith Barr was in Taiwan most of the time we were developing this. So this would be, we started in 1989 or so. In fact, I found that's the first product spec that we wrote. That's dated 1989, and kind of fun trivia. You see it says DTR8 because it didn't have a name yet. So digital tape recorder, 8-channel, kind of seemed like a logical name. But anyway, but I was going to say, Keith was in Taiwan, so we were communicating with faxes, with fax machines. So, Keith would write a long fax while we're all asleep, hey, I'm thinking about this and this, and what if we do it this way, and so on. And we'd read that, and we'd work all day, and then we'd send faxes back. So I've got a giant bin full of all of that old stuff still, which someday I'll have to organize. So there's for some trivia nut out there somewhere, someday there's a way to kind of reconstruct how ADAT all came about.
I want to read through that at some point. Did we just tell you what Stefan mentioned, and you can just bang through these and we'll get into detail later. What are the main obstacles when emulating analog synths digitally?
Good question. So I might surprise some people with this answer. Clearly, I'm an analog synth guy, hence the plethora of things behind me. I love analog synths. That said, I've never been anti-digital. In fact, I've developed a lot of digital products. I think fundamentally, there is no reason you couldn't make a digital system be indistinguishable from analog. But that's kind of like saying there's no reason I couldn't make a digital rendering of Rake such that people couldn't see any difference. The reality is that's technically possible, right? If I take a digital picture of you, everyone will say, well, that's you. And if you have a very high resolution, you'd say that looks amazing. But now to emulate would mean now I want an algorithm to actually recreate you. So we know that there's no reason that digital can't capture what analog sounds like. So why is it so difficult to make digital emulation sound like the originals? And I think, again, that's like replicating a human. I think it comes down to how many programmers are going to really go to the nth degree of capturing every single nuance of what makes analog interesting. So I'll give you an example of a plugin I do enjoy. Our good friends at GForce did a plugin of the Oberheim 8 voice, the OB-E, and even Tom Oberheim loved it. It's the first and only plugin that's officially endorsed by Tom, and it's because we spent a lot. They're really into it. We spent a lot of time talking about how some of the things that are not obvious are what makes analog have its character. And if you're going to software emulate an 8 voice, you need to truly have 8 voices in your algorithm, not just calculate a sound when you play a note. The oscillators need to always be oscillating because the phase relationship of the oscillators is deterministic. If I play a bass line, I don't want the phase relationship of the oscillators to change. I might not be able to identify it by ear, but my brain's going to know something is wrong. And if one voice's volts per octave tracking is a little off, and I'm playing an 8 voice and I'm rotating among the 8 voices, well, then every 8th note I should hear it be slightly sharp or slightly flat. The imperfections and the seeming randomness. So a lot of people who do software emulation, they think the answer is, well, just introduce randomness. That's because obviously you could make it too pure. And the issue to me is it's not random at all. It's entirely deterministic. And so you have to actually model why the analog voices all sound different. What makes it vary from voice to voice, you know, and because there's always that fine line. Obviously, you're a real stickler for things being in tune and timing accurate and so on, which is great. But the reality is, if I played this mini Moog perfectly in tune, I mean, like literally all three oscillators are just locked. They can't beat at all. It doesn't. It sounds like one oscillator, right? It's perfection to a point. So I think it is just about getting things nuanced to that level. And I think we're still, some plugins are still kind of in early stages. You know, they capture some of the aspects, but they don't get it. And I guess, sorry, I'll add one more thing since I've gone on so long. It's also important to note there's a lot of aspects in a synthesizer that are typically nonlinear, and some of the models don't capture those aspects. They'll do the theoretical model of, for example, a filter, but not see where there could be some distortion essentially contributing to the sound. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I get it.
But there are some good ones out there, so you just have to look for them.
What are the main obstacles when doing nonlinear processing, such as distortion digitally?
Well, fortunately, I think those are problems that are largely solved now. But they, early on, I mean, when we started line 6, we probably did what a lot of people were doing at that early stage. There were a few digital distortion products in the mid 90s, which is when we started. And the thing is that you have to recognize that when a signal is recorded digitally, you have an anti-aliasing filter at the front end, right? You have to have a brick wall filter to make sure there's no frequencies above half your sample rate, right? That you'd have fold over and problems. So
you have to oversample.
So the signal goes in, like a guitar goes into a digital processing. You have no problem with that input signal. But now as soon as you do something nonlinear, you are now in the digital domain are introducing harmonics well above your sample rate. So the first experiments we did, probably how most people did, is you just think, oh, well, like, let's take the most simple. I've got a sine wave going in. I'm just going to clip it digitally, and now it's distorted. Well, when you clip it, you're creating harmonics well above your sample rate. So all of a sudden you get all kinds of aliasing artifacts. And there are some earlier digital distortion products from other companies. I won't say who. But if you listen to other products from the 90s, if you know what to play, you do some pinch harmonics and stuff and bend notes, you can hear, it sounds like this, you know, you're tuning a radio. It's just like the massive amounts of aliasing and harmonic sound going on. So we realized we needed to solve this, and we actually put it in our first patent that we needed to oversample when we're in the digital domain, and then have a digital filter to make sure there aren't any artifacts above our oversampled rate, and then downsample back to the original sample rate to come out the DAC. So, and if you listen to
real time.
Yeah, do it in real time. And if you listen to an original pod, I can tell you that, you know, it was always a trade-off with how much processing power we had. So that one, I may not be correct. I think it has like 4 times oversampling. So if you do go to a high gain sound on that pod, play some high notes and bend it, you know, with a lot of pick attack, and listen closely, you can still hear some aliasing, but it was far less aliasing than the other companies that were doing it at the time. Now we have so much more processing power that you can take care of that completely. So anyway,
excellent.
That's the story.
And I gotta say, of course, the Line 6 was another grand slam. You know, the first digital guitar amp. I remember at the old shop, at the Fast Forward Design Shop, sitting in front of 6 different cabinets when we were checking for the speaker for the first one.
Yeah, that's right.
What did we end up with going with? I can't remember.
We ended up with a Celestion, not a vintage 30 though. It was a little more full range. I don't remember the number, but it was. Wait.
It was.
Oh wait, I'm confused. It was. We switched over. It might have been an Eminence speaker in the first one. It was definitely Eminence or Celestion, and I don't recall sorry.
Well,
I apologize to Eminence and
those were the good
Celestions.
ones.
Yeah. Yeah, but we had tried a number of them.
Those were the two choices back
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
They made, it was one or the other.
It was one of,
TV.
I'm pretty sure we ended up with an Eminence at that time, and it was later in the 412 cabinets that we used Celestions.
Marcus, thank you so much, man.
My
And
pleasure.
If anybody's interested, Marcus and I are going to do a few more, and I'll tell you, it's going to be educational. Not from me, but from Marcus.
Too funny.
Thanks again, brother.
My pleasure. It was fun. I'll see ya.
See you later, man. Bye.
Bye.